Hello and welcome to Frost Over the World. Today we've got a special programme as we mark the 20th anniversary of a very special event, the fall of the Berlin Wall. In a worldwide exclusive, the two men who were central to the events of the time will both be on the programme, looking back at those events. I've been to Berlin to meet George Bush, the United States President at the time that the wall fell, and Mikhail Gorbachev, the Soviet leader. We'll also hear from Miklos Nemeth, the man who tore down the Iron Curtain in Hungary. And I'll speak to Hollywood's own David Hasselhoff, whose song at the time, Looking for Freedom, became a veritable anthem for young German protesters. But first, let's put Europe 1989 in context. And we've commissioned a model, not that sort of model, but this sort of model, to show how it looked. East and West were divided by what was known then as the Iron Curtain. Dominated by the Soviet Union, the Eastern Bloc included East Germany, Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, Albania and Yugoslavia. And this is Berlin. That represents Berlin. And it was on this border, these borders along the Iron Curtain, was where East met West. And you can see right here the reason why Berlin became such a focal point of East-West relations from the end of the Second World War. The city is deep inside what was East Germany. And so Western Berlin was a Western enclave, but it was behind the Iron Curtain. When on the 9th of November 1989 the borders were open and the wall effectively fell, it was to be only a matter of time before Berlin was officially reunited. Today, only small parts of the 87-mile-long wall survive. It's no longer a target for graffiti, but it remains a symbol of protest. The murals today highlight concerns including racism, hunger, and poverty. Though some, of course, still reflect the events of 20 years ago. Central Berlin shows little sign of its former division. Modern buildings have sprung up all over the city. Transport links crisscross the country, and the landmarks of a formerly divided city are now the landmarks of a united Berlin. And it was here in Berlin earlier this week that I talked to George Bush, who was the President of the United States on November the 9th, 1989. Mr. President, it's great to see you again. Great to see you again. I have a very clear memory, of course, of November the 9th, because I had the pleasure and the honour of spending it with you in the White House at a dinner for Cory Aquino. And that was on the very same day as it all happened, wasn't it?
It was the exact same day and happened faster and sooner than a lot of us thought it ever would.
Yeah. And yeah, it was quicker than... You'd predicted it would happen within, in an earlier interview, it would happen within your presidency, but it happened within 8 weeks of your saying that.
That's right, and it didn't, I would say that a lot of people were totally surprised. I can't say we saw it coming that fast, though. It was quick, 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 quick.
Why did it fall apart so quickly?
Once the East Germans saw that they could breach the wall without getting clobbered by the Stasi, it just flowed over. The taste of freedom was so strong, David, that they get across the wall and then just kept going. It was amazing.
And I mean, was that the moment that you realized that the Cold War was over?
Well, I can't remember dramatically that recognition then, but yes, it was certainly a key moment, because nobody thought it was going to happen that soon.
You were forging really a sort of partnership with President Gorbachev, almost, weren't you, during that period?
Well, we did, and we had a relationship. Some on our side criticized me for being naive dealing with the Soviet like this. But I felt that there was a different leader. In fact, when he came into office, I wrote President Reagan a handwritten letter saying, I think we're going to be dealing with a very different Soviet leader here. And sure enough, history bore out that judgment.
In terms of what happened next and so on, I mean, once this had happened on November the 9th, then it was sort of almost dominoes falling after that,
That's
wasn't
right.
it?
And it really
the
was.
next day was Bulgaria. And
oh yeah, and all the parts of the Soviet Union fell apart and went the democracy route. But I think the memorable thing was that freedom is so strong and so much of a magnet for these people that it couldn't be resisted.
And you had a great reaction, didn't you, when you went to Hungary too?
Well, Hungary is a good part of this, and Poland. People forget all these countries were involved, and you know, looking for their own freedom. But yes, I remember that in Hungary.
And in fact, that was where you tore up your speech, wasn't it?
Well, that was the nicest thing I've ever done for the Hungarian people. It was an icy cold day. They didn't need a long speech from a guy like me.
And it was raining as well, wasn't it? Because the speech was sodden, wasn't it?
And I gave my raincoat to the lady in the front row. She was just shivering, been there for a couple hours waiting. Turned out I was giving away a Secret Service guy's raincoat, but heck with those details. And Barbara reminded me, that wasn't your coat. I said, shh, but it was a very dramatic day, and tearing up that speech. I had a guy last night here in Berlin say, I remember that. I was there when you tore that speech up. And
oh, there was a huge cheer, I remember seeing it on the film, yeah.
More of a cheer than for the speeches I do give, so that ought to have told me something.
And of course, one other thing that was very important in this period was that you gave, for instance, when it happened, November the 9th, you gave a very low-key press conference.
Right.
And you deliberately played it low-key, didn't you?
Well, I did, and people, you know, I don't know if you remember, but the Senate leaders and the House
Dick Gephardt was one.
Gephardt in the House and Mitchell in the Senate saying, our president doesn't get it. He ought to go and dance on the wall to show the emotion we all feel, which would have been a stupid thing to do. Gorbachev has subsequently thanked me for not doing that, saying he didn't know how his own military was going to react. And so I use the word prudent a lot.
Yeah,
well, it was prudent not to be out there grandstanding. And yet the emotion was such, and our Congress and really across the country, that they said the president ought to be out there doing this. And I didn't want to do that, and I think history will say I was right.
I'm sure, yeah, Gorbachev was thinking when he thanked you for doing that, I mean, it could have so enraged people in Russia that it would have whipped up the opposition.
That's right.
To Gorbachev.
And he didn't know how, his military were feeling marginalized anyway. And his worry was, as he subsequently has told me, that they might just say, hey, we're going to show them that we're no pushover, and, you know, take up arms and get going. And they didn't, fortunately, and we have no blood on our hands because of it. But had we been saying, to the barricades, rally, do all this stuff, why, heavens know how the Russian troops would have responded.
It looks, in terms of the way that the Soviet Union itself fell apart and so on, as though we had overestimated, in a way, the strength of the Soviet Union. It was actually weaker than we had realized in the decade before it happened.
Well, that could be true, but we didn't test that, and fortunately we didn't test it to see how they would have reacted, you know, if they decided to use force. I know it could have been very bitter and brutal for Germany. You know, for a while, maybe not forever, because the U.S. could have come in there with Europe and rallied around.
Do you think the world is safer today than it was in the time of the Cold War?
No question. In my view, no question. There's far less danger of nuclear annihilation. There's still a worry, but far less than that. And there's far less danger of East-West confrontation with ground forces. I'm very relaxed about it, and I'm sure I'm right. But the Cold War, we forget, it was armed. People were armed, and people were. I'll never forget going through the little town in Germany, Mittelruth, and on one side was freedom, on the other side was tyranny, or East Germans. And you could see, one family looking across the fence would see other parts of the family over here. And I just found it obscene and hard to believe. But that's gone.
That has gone. And the relationship with Gorbachev over the years that followed too really was crucial in this situation, wasn't it? I mean, because history sometimes marches on personal relationships, and in that period around 1989, that's what happened, isn't it?
I think the personal relationships do matter. And they matter in that personal relationships can build trust. They could be, sometimes the trust can be misplaced. Sometimes events can overwhelm the trust. But if you have a personal relationship, if you think you know the heartbeat of the other guy, why, you're less likely to have two ships passing in the night, dark ships going their own way.
Was that probably the most historic moment of your presidency, November the 9th, or?
I think so. I think so, or the unification that followed.
Yeah.
The coming down of the wall and the unification was historic. I think it'll prove to be. Now, of course, you know, we had things like Desert Storm, where we said to a small country, Kuwait, we're not going to let you be taken over by a brutal neighbor. And I think that one, I took some satisfaction from that. But I think in terms of history, the coming down of the wall and the unification of Germany will be the most historic thing that happened on my watch.
And the reunification of Germany, I mean, Gorbachev had his doubts about that, as indeed did Margaret Thatcher, didn't she? But
I think she and Mitterrand both.
You must have persuaded him.
Well, Thatcher and Mitterrand, you could understand their reluctance or their feeling we were going too fast backing the Germans, because, you know, they'd seen their own sons and daughters die in two wars on Europe, World War I, World War II. And they said they don't want a repeat of this. And they hadn't quite come along, as far as I had, feeling that Germany had earned its way into the family of free nations. So I could understand the differences, but they didn't try to block it, incidentally. They were just saying, well, you think this through.
Yeah, and in Hungary they gave you a piece of barbed wire, didn't they?
Yes, they did.
From the wall, and you wept when you saw it.
Yes, I didn't. Well, I weep at anything these days, David. I get very emotional. And it's a little embarrassing, frankly.
Well, I look forward to many more such interviews.
I hope
for another
so.
20 years.
You think so?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
I don't know how many more years will be. Well, you'll be here long. You're a young guy.
Yes.
I'm not sure.
I'm 70. How old are you?
I'm 85.
85.
There's a hell of a difference between 85 and 84, too. No, but life is good for us. But I don't do stuff anymore. I don't do interviews. Very, 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 very rare interview. And I'd much prefer to just be back in Houston or in Maine and letting historians decide what we got right and what we may have screwed up, and then get on with life. And our son was president, so I reveled in that. I ached, hurt with the criticism he got, much of which I thought was unfair, some of which was fair, but much of which unfair. But it hurts when you see your own flesh and blood in the crossfire. So now we're out of that, and life is very happy for us. We got our own family, and it's great.
George Bush there, the former president of the United States, in what, as he says there, was a very, 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 very rare interview on the occasion of the 20th anniversary of the Berlin Wall. In a moment, I'll be speaking to the man who was his opposite number at the time, the former president of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev. We'll be right back.